Good morning. This is Avraham Shira for the Chabura of Nahar Shalom. I'm speaking to you today from the holy city of Tzfat. We are in the middle of Torah Zion, the seventh Torah of the second section, Tinyana of Likutei Moharan. Yesterday we learned some important ideas about leaders and what a true Jewish leader is. And a true Jewish leader is someone who has mercy on the people, even on evil people, and he prays for them. And this is one sign of true leadership. Another is that he is osek, he is busy with habiting the world with people that have das, that have knowledge, and spreading knowledge through our children and our students. The Rebbe teaches us also that Moses was the ultimate example of such a person who had knowledge of God, knowledge of the universe, and was able to pass that on to hundreds of thousands of students. And there have been other examples of people at this level. For example, in our generation, the Rebbe of Lubavitch and of other tzaddikim from other places and times were able to pass their das on to millions of people. Now, that is not to say that we have to be those tzaddikim, because that's an unreal goal. The goal, of course, is to pass on our knowledge to our children and students, whoever they may be. Now, of course, the main idea of this type of leader is a person who has mesirat nefesh, self-sacrifice for others. So we should keep these ideas in mind when we talk about leaders, when we look at our present-day leaders, religious and non-religious, political and non-political. The Rebbe gives us the parameters by which we can judge what a true leader is. Now, today we're going to speak about something amazing that the Rebbe teaches us, that when you leave your das behind, when you transfer your knowledge and wisdom and understanding to students and to children, your own children, you literally leave a piece of yourself behind in this world, and that piece of yourself is your essential self. Your das remains in this world through its presence in other people's minds. And the Rebbe says that is a piece of the world to come, the ultimate world. The true immortality of a human being is the spark of his soul that does not die. And that spark of the soul can remain in this world when we pass our das on to others. So let's look at it inside and see where it takes us, because, nobody really wants to die, I think, in a sense, because we are part of this eternal system of life. And death is a transitional action that takes place when this body becomes unable to hold the soul down in this world. Because everyone's soul has a true longing to reunite with its source. Now, when we are deep and into the darkness, we forget about that. We don't feel the desire to return to our source. But every once in a while, you have that empty void inside. Well, that empty void inside is actually calling us to search for that place that we came from, the place of true light. And sometimes it takes a lot of darkness to see the light. Okay, so we begin with the ikar of shleimut, the essential completeness and wholeness of a person, that a person leaves a part of himself in this world through his das, through his knowledge, at the time of his death. When the soul rises above, and someone who knows a little bit of the greatness of God, the essential pleasure of God and knowing God's greatness is knowing that his pleasure is when people down in this low, dark, constricted world, where the light of the infinite is hidden, serve him and praise him and acknowledge him. And down in this lower world, the Rebbe goes on and says, this is his essential pleasure. And he brings the pasuk, and I brought you to praise from a clump of earth and a collection of materials, because that's essentially what our bodies are. And our body is a miraculous thing, that it operates and works and functions so well in this world. And when that clump of clay, if you will, that combination of material elements joins together and then can speak and praise with knowledge of its creator, that is the greatest pleasure to God. Now, to imagine this, perhaps think about somebody who has the ability to create life. Certainly they're trying to do it in Silicon Valley and other places through artificial intelligence. Certainly people who are trying to use stem cells to recreate organs is also making attempts to recreate life. Of course, we have in Jewish history the idea of the Golem of Prague. The great rabbi of Prague created a golem according to our tradition. And a golem was essentially a soul brought down by the tzaddik into a clump of clay. Now that really, a golem is still more robotic than human, but it does have the ability to do things and to follow instructions. Now, if people have a problem with that idea, maybe you like more science fiction, and you can look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because that's another example of creating life in a more literary version, shall we say. Now, whether or not it's a legend or it's true or it's partially true is not really the issue here. The issue here is that human beings have been constantly trying to recreate life to emulate their creator, whether for good or not. Because what greater power is there than a human being to create life? Well, what's interesting is we don't have to go out into a field and do divine incantations to bring a clump of clay to life. All we have to do is get married and be good and holy and bring holy children into the world. That's called creating life as well. But unfortunately, it's not as fantastic and laden with legend, if you will, to excite our appreciation. However, if you look at your children with the proper eye, you will see the miracle of their existence and that you are a partner in their existence. And that, for me, is enough to sense the godliness of creation itself. Okay? And when we give over what we have to them, especially our knowledge of Hashem, the knowledge of Torah, the knowledge of how people are supposed to live and how society is supposed to look, then we are leaving behind a piece of ourselves. And this is the greatest pleasure to God. So you see, God's greatest pleasure is us. So doesn't it make sense that our greatest pleasure should be our children? And do we understand now why from the time of Abraham, the Jewish people have been fighting against the idea of Moloch, the idea of sacrificing one's children to false gods? Now, sacrificing one's children to self-gods doesn't just mean taking them and throwing them into a fire 3,000 years ago at a temple of idol worship. It also means sacrificing our children to things that are not good for them. For example, the parents that push their children so hard to be child stars in Hollywood, or the parents that push their children to be athletes when they're not really at the level, or to force them against their will to perform things that are not really within their skill set. So these things look small and insignificant compared to throwing your child in a fire like the ancient Amalekites did and the ancient Hittites and other tribes would do. Now, they did so because they thought they were appeasing gods, but all they were doing was creating tremendous rage in heaven. So if you want to be godlike, just have holy children. And don't throw them in the fire. any fire, whether it's Hollywood or Washington, D.C. That fire is another place I wouldn't want my children to be thrown into. Okay. But when we leave behind, the Rebbe says, our dot below, and in this world, this lowly world, through a son or a student, and we learned also that the son and student are two concepts that are combined. That when your child learns from you, he's also your student. And when your student looks to you as a person of Das, a person that he can receive life force and knowledge and truth from, then you are like his father. So these two concepts are intertwined. And the last line of this paragraph, then such a situation, a person is considered nekshav ke'iluhu batzmo mamash nishar ba'olam. And he says it's as if mamash, he's leaving himself in the world even when he dies. Now, is that a nice kind of poetic statement? Is that a rhetorical device that the Rebbe is telling us? Well, if it was written by a junior cleric from some small-time school, I might think that. But we're talking about one of the greatest tzaddikim of the modern era, the last 500 years. In Judaism, the last 500 years is the modern era. He says he's leaving himself mamash behind. How could that be? Well, let's ask a question. What is your das? It is a collection of ideas, a collection of perceptions, a collection of commands, if you will. Now, human das is like a software program. It is a collection of commands that when I see the sun in the morning, I decide, hopefully, that it's time to get up and praise Hashem. And when I see the sun going down in the afternoon, I think it's a time that I have to pray the afternoon prayer. Those are little tiny commands that exist throughout our days. When I say Shema, when I put on tefillin, when I give charity, any of these good deeds that the Torah asks us to do, when we do them, we're expanding our program. And when we give that program over to others, whether it's our students or our children, they receive the program. So in a real way, your mind is now active in their mind. When you read a book, you're entering the mind of the author. That's part actually of the pleasure of reading books, because I'm leaving my little mind and I'm entering the author's mind. And hopefully that author has a greater perception of life than I do. And therefore I'm entering a greater mind. I'm taking his mind into mine at the same time. So when we engage in Torah and prayer and the holy activities that the Torah advises us to do, and can give that to someone else, their mind is literally taking a piece of our mind, and then we are living in this world. You want to say through them? Well, it's closer than just through them. It's one mind and another becoming one. And that's why we say a man and a woman, a married couple, when they have true love and true peace, they are one. Their minds are one. That's why I see over and over that I'm thinking the thoughts that my wife is thinking, and vice versa. We're anticipating each other because there's this psychic connection that takes place when your minds are one. And of course, the portal, the entryway to that type of psychic connection is love and compassion and empathy. Because our minds are just processors of information. And when we're connected by the heart, then the minds become one. And so literally, as the Rebbe says, we really are still in the world by the ideas that we're sharing in the world when they enter other people's minds. And if you don't think it's true, just look around you. The people that have died hundreds of years ago are still alive in your mind. When you think their thoughts, they're as if thinking through you. And that's where life is lived, is in the mind. My body is an external aspect of living life. But the mind and the ideas of the heart and mind together create a life force that continues on after us. And so that life force that transfers from one to another over thousands of years is still alive. So when you learn Torah, you are entering the mind of Moses. And of course, Moses' mind had entered the mind of God. So the chain link is happening person by person, mind by mind. And there's more that can be said about this, and perhaps we will come to it. The Rebbe goes on to tell us, V'kol adam yochol kayem zot, and every person can exist and establish this. How? La'amid talmidim, to stand up students, to raise up students. Ki shnayim medabrim yacha beyirat shamayim, when two people are speaking together about the awe of God, the wonder of God, the greatness of God, and that includes the concept of the fear of punishment and reward and punishment, but those are small levels of fear compared to the true awesomeness that there is a world like this world, and there is a creator of this world. It's more unbelievable than anything we can imagine. Azai keshachad me'ir lechavero be'ezed dibur, and when one friend illuminates to another friend through one little piece of speech, nechshav chavero etzlo bechinat talmid, then at that moment that your friend receives a new idea from you, he's considered your student. Now, that doesn't mean he's your lifetime student, and that doesn't mean he owes you anything. That just means that you've been performing a wonderful thing by giving him over a piece of your das. But tzarich kol adam lezaher, but every person needs to be careful. Every person needs to be careful. And every person should be very careful to be busy with this. In other words, when you don't know what to say in a crowd, think of Hashem. When you don't know what to say in a one-on-one conversation, think of Hashem. Think of something that illuminated you. One moment of your inspiration. One moment where you saw divine providence in your life. When you share that with somebody else, you are sharing your das. And you are illuminating his mind with that moment that you experienced. And then at that moment, you are performing and achieving what the Rebbe's called here. You are becoming a teacher for that very moment. Do you get a PhD from it? No. Should you try to get a PhD from it? Well, nowadays you can get a PhD in Kabbalah. You can get a PhD in Chassidut. You can get a PhD in just about anything. But whether or not it's from one university or a yeshiva or a seminary is not the point. The point is to live these moments of sharing das and illuminating each other. And then we create, what the Rebbe says, a spark, a tiny window of immortality opens by sharing that with each generation after us. And that tiny window of immortality expands as our knowledge and our friendship circle, if you will, expands. So the old idea of the internet, and especially of Facebook, is this expansion of interconnection. Now, I see that a lot of people use Facebook for the wrong reasons, and God should protect them and help them to see the right reasons to use these tools, because when we expand our network for the wrong reasons, we do not create what we're talking about here. We do not create a network of immortality, of sharing knowledge that will go on from generation to generation. And when we do, we will live through that. And that's why it says, by the way, the astounding statement of the rabbis that tzadikim gedolim b'mitatan michayehem, that the righteous are greater when they die than when they are alive, and that it also says kishemidabrim divrei Torah shelachad, right? When you speak the words of someone else's Torah, even after he dies, his lips vibrate in the grave. Now, this is a strange statement. In Judaism, there is the idea that certain righteous people are so holy that their bodies do not corrupt, and there have been many documented evidences of this. However, what does it mean that you say, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, that Rabbi Akiva's lips are now vibrating in the grave? That's a pretty hard thing to get your head around. But when we understand that it's happening from within and that we exist in a living network of soul 6,000 years long, all the way back to Adam. And then when I say some other great person's words, that there is a reverberation going backwards in time because at this level there is no time, then it's a little easier to understand that we are, so to speak, causing the lips of that tzaddik to vibrate. Now, let's say that there's only bones left in that box, right? Or in that burial cave. But the tzaddik is still alive in his world, in the upper world. And so his lips literally can vibrate spiritually in his soul. That we cause our souls to vibrate one to the other. That your frequency is being felt by others, not only wherever you're sitting right now, whether it's your office and you're in a bad mood and other people feel your bad mood without saying a word. That is also the idea of carrying on our das, vibrating out into the world through our minds and our belief system and our pain and our joy. So all we have to do is extrapolate from your office or your kitchen or wherever you are right now to understand that even your dead parents and grandparents are alive and active inside you at a certain level. And so they are living through you. And when you say their words over, literally they receive from that. And part of the proof of the Jewish practice of this is that every year on the day that our loved ones die, we say Kaddish. When we say Kaddish, we are literally praising God in the name of the departed, and they receive merit for that and can rise to higher realms in the spiritual world. Now, if you don't believe that, that's okay. It's a hard thing to believe. It took me a long time to get all these ideas together and to learn and to relearn and to pray and to learn and to pray, because they don't just sink in all at once. But when we start to connect the dots, we start to see that these rabbis are not just making stuff up. You know, they got better things to do. But they're trying to share their das with us because they are part of the system. They are part of the living network of soul that all of us are part of. Now, the Jewish people are the integral soul called Knesset Yisrael. We are like the one nation that is supposed to shine out to the 70 archetypal nations. You know, imagine a schoolroom full of 70 students, and then there's a teacher. Now, some of the Jewish people qualify for that, and some don't. But that's not the point. The point is that we, the Jewish people, are a collective, and we are designed to share what's given to us to the 70 archetype nations, which nowadays might include, I don't know how many nations are in the world now, maybe 300 or 400. But regardless, that's our job, and that's our relationship. And again, as I've said before, it's not that we're better. We just have different jobs. But all of us need to work together for the company of humanity to operate, to receive a profit, to give dividends to the world in this and the next world. Okay. So every person can do this simply by telling their friend what happened to them or what they learned today that illuminates them, and share that illumination with others. Now, the Rebbe goes on to tell us, but sometimes we can do the opposite. How? When you do receive some speech, some word from your friend, right? Then we can turn it back around. When the person says something back to you, you become his student, even after you, a moment before, were his teacher. So it goes back and forth, which seems to be a good thing. But every person needs to be aware that the world needs to be filled with people, that the idea of population control is anti-Torah. There is plenty of room on this planet, and there's plenty of resources. And the idea of controlling population, which has become kind of a hysterical idea in the minds and in the mouths of those who espouse various theories. Thomas Malthus from England in the 18th century was one of their big provocateurs of the idea of population control. And that idea has been spread into conspiratorial thinking to teach us that there are people in the world that want to cut the population down because we're eating too much and drinking too much and we're polluting too much. And therefore there's too many people. Like some beloved family members of mine said, I don't want to get married and have kids because it's a terrible world and there's not enough to go around. And that's a complete lie. So when you hear these ideas of population control, you should look to the top of the pyramid and ask, well, how efficiently are the resources being used? How are the leaders leading? How are they distributing the resources? It's a horrible thought to think about the gender side in China. There's whole villages in China that don't have women because all the female babies were thrown out at birth because of the communist policy of one child. So now you've got a situation 40 years later where there are young men that don't have women to marry. And if you don't believe me, just check out the docs on this on YouTube. And these poor fellas are wandering around their villages without a wife and without children. Now, to me, that sounds like hell on earth, to be so disconnected. And this idea of population control is exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to do as Jews. We want to populate the world with Das. And Das includes the ability to distribute resources in a proper way. Why does America pay people not to grow corn or not to grow wheat? Because they want to keep the price higher. So why can't all that corn and wheat that could have been grown very easily be distributed to the hungry people of Africa and South America? Why are people selling their hair and robbing graves in Venezuela because they can't get enough to eat and drink? Why aren't planes and helicopters dropping in food and water being brought in to those poor people? Whereas in America, there's so much excess and surplus. It's a shame. It's a shanda in Yiddish, if you will. And I'm not criticizing any one individual because these are massive movements going on in the world. These are huge collections of people that we're talking about here. And it's not any one person's fault. But if you're a person and you hear this class and you're a leader and you have power to distribute resources, then you are saving the lives of generations to come. Because if you save one life, that person might have 5 children, and those children might have 5 children. And next thing you know, you've saved 25 lives. So this is one take on what the Rebbe means by the importance of bringing people into the world and teaching them Das, teaching them true knowledge. And if you're not Jewish, the 10 Commandments is good enough. If everybody kept just the 10 Commandments, it'd be a much different world. Okay. Ki lo tohu barata leshevet yitzara. And the Rebbe brings the pasuk from Yeshaya the prophet. And not for chaos did God create the world, rather to dwell in it and to create. He created it for a dwelling place. And the next time you hear somebody talking about there's too many people, well, if you feel like arguing, you can argue. And if you don't feel like arguing and the people are not going to be convinced by you and they're not going to receive your words, it's better to leave the conversation. Because one of the things that the tzaddikim teach us is that if people do not receive your das, do not give it to them. Because that das is active intellect. It is sparks of God's knowledge. And if they reject it, those sparks ask you, why did you speak me when no one was there to receive it? Because your das is light, and their head is the vessel to hold the light. And if you speak words of knowledge to people who don't want to receive it, then those words of knowledge, Rabbi Nachman teaches, will seek revenge. They will torment you, God forbid. So this takes extra wisdom to understand and to know who to speak to and who not to speak to. And this takes practice, obviously, and it takes observation to know people and to know when they're open to receiving a new piece of your das, of your knowledge, of your perception of the Creator and the creation, and your perception of how divine providence has guided you to where you are today. If they don't want to hear it, don't tell them. You could say, well, some wonderful things have happened to me, but don't tell them what it is until you're certain that they want to hear it. And they'll say, oh yeah, what happened to you? You say, well, it's a special thing. I'm not sure you really want to hear it because it's about God. And you're a person who doesn't really want to hear about God as far as my experience of you. You can tell them that. And they'll say, wait a minute, no, I want to hear. Okay, then they start to build a kli. Because the building of the kli, the vessel to receive, is the wanting to know things. And if people don't want to know, then there's nobody to receive. So it takes wisdom and perception and patience to build the vessel that can receive your knowledge. Now, if you haven't seen this happen, well, I've seen it happen a lot. When I start to talk and no one wants to listen, I quickly tell myself, Avraham, this is not the time to talk. You see it at Shabbos tables is very, very often happens because, I've learned this new Torah and I have to give it over because I'm so afire with Torah. Wonderful. But everybody else is talking about their day or their week or what's happening, and that's their right. And if they're not interested in listening, I should be interested in being quiet. Because sharing das is a holy thing. And we do not expose holy things to criticism, and making fun is even worse. If I say something that people make fun of, then I'm actually causing God's name to be profaned. When people make fun of Torah, they're profaning God. And I don't want to be a source of that in others. Even though they're the ones that are speaking it, I'm the one who is responsible for causing it. So you understand how sensitive das is? Holy knowledge is sensitive material. And if it doesn't have a place that's proper to go, it will turn into the opposite. And that's why you have a person like Bernie Sanders speaking evil about Israel, and he's a Jew. What's a Jew doing bad talking about Israel, the final place that we have to go on this planet? I don't know Bernie Sanders, and I'm not really interested in politics too much. But I just read that he's telling the world that Jews are the Zionists, which are Jews. And don't be mistaken. Zionists are Jews, and a lot of Jews are Zionists. And when another Jew on international platforms goes out and says that we're racists, that's a profanation of God's name to the entire world. Now, of course, I don't know what kind of educational background he has, and I assume he hasn't learned much Torah. But for him to say such a statement is merely a platform that he's being paid to speak, in my opinion. Now, again, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm trying to illustrate something. That when we speak words, we have to be careful what we're saying because they have power. And the light of truth or falsehood is in those words. And if we don't take responsibility, then it'll come back to haunt us. And Jewish history is full of people like this that are actually Jews that go against the Jews, all the way back to the times of the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians. Right? We know that the two Jews were the ones who reported Moses to Pharaoh. When Moses encountered a taskmaster whipping a Jew who was helping build Pharaoh's cities, Moses took care of him. According to the Kabbalah, he said a divine name and the man was swallowed in the earth. Now, whether you or not you believe that's possible, that's okay. The Torah reports that he struck him. And then 2 Jews saw Moses do it and they reported to the Egyptians. It's the same idea. It's Jews coming out against Jews. Now, it's one thing to say, I don't believe I was born a Jew, but it's not really my practice, and I'm a pantheist, and I believe in allness and oneness and all the New Age ideas I used to learn when I was a teenager. Fine, but to come out against Judaism is to come out against God. So when you hear people talk this way, turn off the TV, turn off the radio, turn off your website. because these things are evil and they cause more evil in the world. And they give force and power to those people who really want to destroy the Jews. Okay. But we are charged with the mission of spreading knowledge through the world, through our children and students. And that is why God created the world in the first place, so that there could be a race that sings his praise down here in this lowly, condensed, contracted world of physicality. Remove the physicality, we all see the truth instantly. The minute you leave your body, you know the truth. You know there's one God, and there can be no other. And the idea of having two or more gods, like my friend was on a bus putting on tefillin in India, and an Indian asked him, "What are you doing?" And my friend said, "Well, I'm declaring the oneness of God, saying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad." And he says, "Oh, you have one God? Oh, that's too bad. I have 37. Now, what that Indian really means is that he has 37 powers that he worships. But behind all powers, there's only one God, and there can only be. And when you learn Kabbalah and you learn how the world was created according to these great masters, then you understand that it has to be one entity, one living force in the universe that created a space in himself to create us. Just like a woman has a space inside her womb to create a child. So in that aspect, God is feminine. And of course, there's another aspect where God is masculine because he gives that structure animation. And of course, that animation is emanating from the speech that's coming from the source of creation. Now, speech here is a metaphor. Okay. This is the essential inhabitation of the world. When the world is full of people that have das. And he calls them bnei de'ah, children of knowledge. And again, it's not important how much you know, but how real what you know is to you. And that means how much you live it. Of course, the more you know, the more you're going to want to know. And that's the way it works. So a lot of people turn away from religion because they're afraid of it. They're afraid of cults. They're afraid of maniacal thinking. They're afraid of conspiracy. They're afraid of dogma. And you know what? Those are good things to be afraid of. I agree. But so I have to build myself to know I'm not joining a cult. And I'm not accepting dogma on the surface. I'm going to explore a dogmatic idea according to the ancient texts. I'm going to find the source of it in the Kabbalah, and then I'm going to extract the truth from that dogma, that when we say the world is black and white, good and evil, well, it's not that way here. This world is completely gray, a billion shades of gray, right? But in heaven, it really is black and white. You see the good and you see the not good. And one is called heaven and one is called hell, and we have all kinds of names for these things. But in this world, the world is mixed. Black and white is not really the world we live in. We live in a world that's called Klipat Noga, the shining cloud. Now, the shining cloud is a metaphor for the idea of light surrounded by darkness mixed together. We spoke about this in an earlier class where we take a great idea and we exaggerate it and it becomes evil. Or we take an evil idea and try to find the good in it. So for example, let's take the idea we've been speaking about. The idea of overpopulation and controlling population and allowing a family to only have one child that forces them to keep the baby boys and throw out the baby girls. It's just a horrible thing to think about. But where is there some spark of good in that? Well, there is. What's the spark of good? The government does need to help their people properly manage population growth, but not by making laws that inspire people to commit infanticide. Rather, by taking the resources of the nation and creating new villages, new farms, new localities where people can spread out. China is a massive place. I'm sure there's more places and more resources in Western China, in places that have not been inhabited. There are places where if the government took the money to recreate new economies, new jobs, new homes, then the people could spread out and they wouldn't have 15 million, 20 million people living in Shanghai. People aren't made to live in an area 20 million strong, in one municipality. People are made to have their own space. People are made to have a little land, a little bit of air to breathe, a little bit of earth to walk on. But instead of marshaling those resources to develop their societies in a healthy, proper way, regulated, controlled, the resources go to things like artificial intelligence and making weapons and ways of killing people. Now, isn't that a wonderful way to take and squander resources? So this is not a Chinese problem alone. This is a human problem. And it is extant everywhere on the globe. So we found the good. We found some good even in these evil policies. And yet we need to elevate them. And the same is true with policies throughout the world, that we can find the good in them. Then a leader is being a leader and not a politician merely saying what I need to say to get you to like me, to get you to vote for me. Give me more likes on Facebook. Whoa. That's what I'm all about. Friend me, subscribe. But, this is all about building personal glory. And that is not what we're here to do. So we need to extract the good out of Facebook and extract the good out of, our YouTube channels. And the good is to spread our das, the true das, and not try to create personal fame. I asked myself this morning, why am I teaching on Facebook? People write negative things. People send comments that are indecent. I said, well, I'm on Facebook. The truth is because so many of my students have asked me to do it and said, Avraham, you have to get it out there. It's time. So I hope it's time. And I hope these words are received in your heart as they're coming from my heart. And we are in the festival week of Pesach. And, it's a wonder, these festivals. We have 7 days to celebrate, not just one. And we have 7 days to share and to create wonderful gatherings and to give over our das. And so you see, in Israel, when I walk down the street and I see someone, the first thing I know is they're telling me a new Torah. They're illuminating my brain with what they learned. And I'm receiving something I never heard before. And that's one of the reasons why I live in Eretz Israel, and especially in Bat Ayin in Jerusalem, because they're educated, wonderful people in these places that are sharing their das. Now, if you live out there in the exile, wherever you live, that does not mean that we are absconding from that responsibility of sharing our das. And even if you're standing in line at the bank in Manhattan, there's somebody there that you can touch with one kind word, one good morning with true sincerity, and smile and say, you wouldn't believe what I just heard. And share with them an idea. Share with them some of these ideas. Share with them other ideas. And by doing so, you're making your little space a place of holiness, and a place of illumination. And then we are fulfilling the first command of the Torah to spread the human race with knowledge over the entire world. So I hope that everyone has joy during these days and has a chance to receive new knowledge from your teachers or from your books or from classes online, wherever you have an opportunity. Because when we go back to the everyday world next week and our regular work weeks, now some people, of course, are still there, but nonetheless, when we go back there, the challenge is to bring these joyous moments of the festival and the lights of Das into the weekday, and to elevate all our times and all our places with the knowledge of Hashem and his presence in this world. So God bless all of you with a wonderful day, and to have the boldness and the confidence to know that you are, just by listening to this class, you are connected to a great network that is 6,000 years long. Hag Sameach. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow from the holy mountain of Meron, or somewhere in between. All the best.